Dawa Eloqua Mado. Thank you. You know, it's my honor to host the Pueblo Book Club, and it's just a wonderful way that we get to share the indigenous narrative. Certainly, when we think about what's happened to our country, when we have issues of what really is history and what really constitutes patriotism. We had a call in the last couple months about a 1776 commission to teach students about who and what America is all about. But the thing that the book club tries to do and works to do is uphold the indigenous narrative to make sure that we don't appear as revisionists, but really that we add to the stories of the narrative that is no longer included and if not completely ignored. And it seems like eons ago when I was able to sit with all of you, those who oftentimes come to the Pueblo Cultural Center and join in our Pueblo Book Club, but it seems like it's such a long time ago. So I really do miss you all. And I'm really grateful to every one of you who gets to join us for our book club. And then nowadays, through Zoom and through the internet, we get to share with you a little bit about our book. So I'm extremely grateful and thank you for all to join us. Before I introduce to you our very special guest, what I'd like to do is briefly touch on some things to make sure that we are all understanding of the etiquette that we want to share with you as it applies to our book club. So as you see on your screen, there's some things that I want to show you. We appreciate your understanding and your patience. And most importantly, we appreciate your respect for one another when you make comments. Also to think about others as you want to make comments and perhaps speak with joy during our time here at the Pueblo Book Club. Also, we ask that you, if you want to contribute to our discussion, limit your comments and questions to about a minute. And then the more we can limit that time limit, then we can then have more people come in, and then hopefully we'll get a chance to come back to you again, especially if you have another comment or question or reflect on perhaps a comment that was made by our very special guest today. Until we call upon you, we'd ask that if you mute your screen, and then when we say are going to recognize you, then we would say we're going to be going to you. So your screen is unmuted, then you can begin and talk to us, and we appreciate that. We ask also that you speak slowly and clearly. Sometimes with this new medium of the digital medium, the way we speak sometimes can get distorted. So just take your time, and we understand that as well. So that's why we ask you to speak slowly and clearly. If you want to make a comment or question, certainly you're welcome to do that. You have several opportunities. Either use the chat opportunity at the side of your screen, or you can see at the bottom of your screen, it says raise your hand. You can let us know that you have a comment or question, and we'll certainly look forward to chatting with you today. So again, it's my very special honor to share with you something that has been, one of the interesting things of being the moderator of this book club. And right now, it's my extreme honor and humbled privilege to introduce to you our very special guest. Our very special guest is an Indigenous woman who has become a celebrated and recognized voice of the narrative of her Muskogee Creek people, as well as to other Indigenous peoples throughout the Western Hemisphere. She is a gifted and sublime voice through the diversity of art and music, and she has inserted a narrative which continues to be ignored by I guess you would say, by almost any source of education. And so we really honor that. As a poet, as an author, musician, educator, and now the only second individual to hold the prestigious title of Poet Laureate for the United States for multiple terms. So it's my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome you, Joy Harjo, to our Pueblo Book Club. And she joins us from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Welcome, Joy.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you very much. I've looked forward to this for quite a while. We've looked at your books, other than this one that we're going to be talking about. So tell us a little bit about what, one thing I want to know, you can read anything about what a poet laureate is. Most states have their own poet laureate, but really what is the responsibilities and what is, I guess you would say, not necessarily the burden, what is the chore that you have as a poet laureate?
I guess first I want to say that I'm Muskogee Creek. I'm here in the Muskogee Creek Nation Reservation, which was confirmed recently by the Supreme Court. I'm Kacha and Wind Clans and Ogiabova's ceremonial ground, and the 23rd U.S. Poet Laureate. And yes, I just had a third term confirmed. It's happened only once before. Not because I'm special, but because of COVID. Yeah, because I haven't gotten to be out and around. I mean, I've been out and around virtually, that's for sure. But yes, what I was told right early on is like, because I've watched, I know there are several and everyone is different, the poet laureates, but I was told there's really no set responsibility except you have to behave. There's no set responsibility, and that every poet laureate makes it what they wish. Some of them it's an honor. So some just enjoy the honor for a year or so, and others do projects. I've been at work on several projects, but my poet laureate project is on a story map that will be available. It's up right now on the Library of Congress site that shows 47 contemporary Native poets. You can click on it and there's markers. And I asked that the map, I get to help choose. We worked with the Geography and Maps Division. There are no boundaries that say this is the US, this is Canada. All of those boundaries are gone. All you see is earth and water. And to me, that's how I thought that was important, even as each of the poets talks about place and then reads their poem, and then you get to hear them and see an image. So I've been working on that, and then there'll be a teacher's guide, some teacher's guides, and we'll be traveling with that a little bit this next year once it starts to clear up a little bit. Also this year, I finished a new memoir called Poet Warrior: Call for Love and Justice that will be out from Norton in September. And today after this, I'll be fixing a couple of voice tracks and then going up to Seattle to mix a new album that will be out in March called I Pray for My Enemies. But anyway, my duties have been really representing poetry. And I remember when I was a student at the University of New Mexico involved in Kiva Club, we were very political, and because we realized that, we were part of a university community, but we were part, essentially, that the lands that the university were on were native lands, and that we were part of the native communities around us. But I was very inspired by being part of that community. And I remember I was painting then, I was an art major. So was Laura Tohi, the poet laureate, Navajo poet Laura Tohi. We both met each other as art students. And, but I remember saying to myself, if I do anything else in my life, by the time I leave this life, I want us us indigenous peoples to be seen as human beings. So I think that poet laureateship is a doorway to that. It says, wait, there's natives that write poetry. And I say, well, I'm not the only one. That's why I like these anthologies. I also am one of the editors, along with Jennifer Forrester and Leanne Howe, and a whole group of native editors, poetry editors, of a Norton anthology that came out in August. It's already in its second printing, and Oprah picked it up. An anthology that when the light of the world was subdued, our songs came through. And so I have evidence, well, there are a lot of us, and we've been poets and speakers and singers for generations.
Yeah, I noticed that in the book, there's a small comment from Oprah, as well as some very prominent people who appreciate all that you do. And I guess the one thing is, obviously, there are people who tell stories. There are people who sing songs, who paint, who do art. And poetry is just another expression. So why poetry? How does poetry become so just embedded in what you want to say?
Yeah, that's interesting how that came about. Yeah, I love poetry. My mother was a singer. My mother was a singer and wrote songs, and we used to have a lot of those country swing musicians at our house. And she only had an 8th grade education, but what she took away from it, besides being ashamed that she was poor and she didn't want to go, she didn't want to go back, was the poetry. And so she knew like some of the, and she loved poetic language, which found their way into her songs. And then, what broke it open for me was being a student. I mean, at Indian school, I went to IAI when it was a Bureau of Indian Affairs school, and everybody wrote poetry. We would send notes and we would write. We were very in descriptive language. The students, I realized when I was working on my memoir that everybody was still in their oral cultures. And at that time in the late 60s, we were all within a generation of total orality, which is an appreciation of the power of language and how it is that power of language is understood in all aspects of our lives. And so it was there that I started really paying attention to that, even though I wrote horrible little poems that got me into trouble in my classroom. But
Yeah.
yeah, and then I wrote a few horrible songs for an all native acid rock band that Dan Domingo was part of,
Oh.
among others. And then it wasn't until I was at the University of New Mexico and I met Leslie Silko there, Simon Ortiz, others, and it was like, whoa, this is native poetry. Wow, you can write poetry and be a native and write about what's going on in the world and in our lives. So I started writing poetry to talk about, like what was some of the things going on. It was somewhat political, but I'm a romantic and I love beauty. And so that always entered into it. And that's what happened. I had no plan to be a poet. I was going to be a painter like my Aunt Lois Harjo and my grandmother, Naomi Harjo, who also, by the way, played saxophone in Indian Territory before
Mm.
statehood, this full blood Creek Indian woman playing saxophone, and both of them got their BFAs in art, right around statehood. And I always say, put that in your bag of images of Native people.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, speaking of art, behind you, you have a very interesting image there, and you briefly talked about it. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, this is some Muskogee Creek beadwork from a piece that is in the collections of the NMAI, National Museum of the American Indian, in DC. And I got to go into those collections years ago and photographed some of the pieces. And this is one blown up. It kind of looks like the paintings I want to start doing. Right before, a month before the Poet Laureateship was announced, I told my age, I said, I don't want to do any more interviews. I'm tired of talking. I just want to paint for a while. And next thing I know, I'm Poet Laureate. So this looks like the paintings I want to do. And if you look at these images, they're like plants. If you think about most of our indigenous arts, those symbols and motifs really come from the shapes of plant life, even microscopic, or of elements like winds and other elements that have everything to do with the quality of our lives.
Yeah, that the science has a word for that. They're called fractals. That just about any kind of organism and or natural occurring entity, there's some recurrence to it. There's some repetitiveness that you can see in those designs if we simply take the time to look at that. How flowers are arranged and how leaves are designed. All of them really just demonstrate I guess you'd say, the intricacies of nature and our world.
Yeah, and we're all connected in the
Exactly.
exact way that the plants are connected to us.
And before we continue, I know that we have many of our attendees online. And so what I'm going to do before we go to our attendees and perhaps have questions or comments for Joy, what I want to do is begin our discussion. I brought up a slide that the three things that I took away as I was reading An American Sunrise. And in doing so, I'll tell you what, when I just saw the title of the book, it brought back to me one strong image when I was growing up, that it helps sort of explain the difference between life and death. And I know you had a very interesting and very thoughtful poem that I connected with about your mother. But then the first time I experienced a relative's death was when my grandmother's brother passed away, and he was 99. And it was such sorrow one day. But then the very next day, when we lived in my grandmother's house, we had a wood stove. And when the sun came through in the early morning and she's got a wood stove and she's cooking breakfast, you see the smoke, but you see the sunlight coming through that window and hitting the dust and the smoke. And when I saw the title of your book, that's what it brought to my mind. And it's that idea of that human condition of a shared journey. And so one of the things that's talked about in the back of the book when we talk about learning to read from your poetry is this shared journey. So if you would kind of tell us a little bit about a shared journey, this and talked about how you, the very beginning of the book, you put on the map of the Muskogee Creek, um, I guess you'd say, dis, dispersion going to another place. Would you tell us a little bit about that, Joy?
I will, but I love that image you just spoke of about your grandmother. And one of my favorite images, I always come back to it in childhood, is the sunlight coming through the kitchen and through the leaves of the plants, and how you could see the particles that you, maybe when you're younger, I can still see them. You pay attention and they're like little globules of rainbows coming through. And I always remember that and playing with them. It was like playing with the sun or the sunlight. That's one thing I always go back to, is that life.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in the sacred fire of the house, which is the cooking fire. That's
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that's absolutely important, and it has power and it has a place for us just as much as the fire that goes on in the circle, in our circle, outside. They're kind of mirror images, so to speak. So this book came about. I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was born here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then went to Indian school and lived in the Southwest many years, and even Hawaii for about 11 years, and came back. But I got offered a job at University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and took the job for a number of reasons. But it gave me, and my husband's also the same nation, tribal nation, and the same ceremonial ground. So it offered us an opportunity to go back to all those old places, because we don't forget them. I even found a house that belonged to an uncle. A
Oh
lot of
my.
these images of us just being, dragged out from the bushes where we lived wildly or like savages, and rounded up. But we had lands and houses and places they wanted, the newcomers wanted. So they ran us out of there. And I've read stories and research, because a lot of people think poets just think things up, but this book has a lot of research involved in it. Where the native people be forced out of their houses at gunpoint and be standing there watching a new family just moving in and taking over. Is So this map that's in the book is one of the Trails of Tears. Different family groups went. And this one was the one taken by my grandfather, 6 generations, Manawa, and his family. Betsy Kozer was, I think, his third wife. He lost one wife at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. And so this is the route. And he took this with the Fish Pond Miko, who is the head of the grounds. And their families took this from Talladega, Talladega, Alabama. So this is theirs. But I took it from, what is it called? Bending Way. I name it in the back, but it's a book that just came out. I think it's from University of Nebraska, that shows many of these different trails and what families were on those different particular traveling groups. I mean, there was one group that was put on a steamboat that was not made to hold as many. They put twice as many people it was to hold, to take them across the Mississippi, and it went under because it couldn't hold that
Oh
amount.
my.
A lot of people. That was the Monmouth. So anyway, this is the trail that the family in particular, that one part of my family took, on the Trail of Tears. So it's very particular. Everybody's stories. I mean, there are many of these. And as I say somewhere, I've said there are trails of tears all over. The Navajo people have one. Um, it's Kit Carson, there's a lot of them all over the country. It's not just the Cherokee. So I thought it was important to show this map and say names. These are the people, you know, we're still here. We didn't disappear. And I know going back there, it was so painful at first because you're in these beautiful homeland areas. And, I thought I would love to live here. I'd love to live over here by the Chattahoochee River where the tie snake lives. We have that story. And they even have an image. They even now have a marker up saying the tie snake lives here. But, who lives there? The people, our tribal nation is now in Oklahoma. So
Mhm.
it was very strange when I was happy to be coming back to Oklahoma and leave. And I thought, this is crazy because we fought so hard to stay here, but nobody's here. But the land is so beautiful, especially around Columbus, that area where my family, in that part of the Alabama. So it set up all of this contradictory feelings. And so I looked out into the trees, and my spirit asked me, what did you learn here? And that's how an American sunrise. Came.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting to hear, to know that something from nature inspired you.
Hmm. Yeah.
And you're right that certainly many indigenous groups of people have had to endure removal from their homes to to survive, and to and for those of us who have some connection to an indigenous culture, indigenous civilization, in a sense, if as long as we continue to tell those stories, we honor them because we keep those stories alive.
Hmm. Right. There are real names. There's people. There are people. And I think that's what I like what you said at the very beginning, that this book club and, is to uphold our place. We're not taking away the story. And I know their naysayers would say that we're trying to change the story of America. But no, we're trying to fix the story, to repair the story of America, the damaged story. And we're seeing a lot of that because we are essential. Indigenous peoples are essential to this story, and we've been disappeared or kept, from, we've been deleted from this story.
In just a bit, I'm going to go to one of our participants, Lynn, so you can get ready, Lynn. But what I wanted to kind of make a comment, Joy, is that, you know, as I mentioned a bit ago, this, I guess you'd say, this dog whistle of saying that America stands for American values. America's United States has these certain constructs that define what liberty is. But when, especially working at the Indian Public Cultural Center, when we have guests and they're so, um, I guess you'd say, amazed the fact that they had not heard some of the stories that we want to let our guests know, we've got accused of being revisionists. And so I would ask, how do you see that if someone said, well, you're a revisionist, you're trying to change history, you're trying to alter it?
I would ask them to think about the term revisionist,
Yeah.
and apply it to themselves. But you have to do it nicely. I mean, there's nothing to be gained for any of us to be, it's about educating, and some people don't want to be educated, as we've learned, or don't. Some people really hold on to, it's like the mascot issue. They get so emotionally bound up in an image or a story, they don't want to let it open to include all of the elements of it. So it's a hard one to walk. It's a very difficult one to walk. I'm working on in January, I'll resume work on a musical that will tell the story. It will tell a story of a young Muskogee Creek, mostly Muskogee Creek band in Tulsa. And the young man, Justice is his name, Justice Fields, is finding that the roots of blues and jazz are partly Muskogee Creek. They're partly Muskogean people, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But we have all the evidence too that when that music was be emerging, we were part of the story. So I always say when I played blues and jazz that I'm playing Muskogee Creek music.
The origins, the seeds are coming through. The
Yeah,
seeds are blooming now, huh?
so we're part of all of this story, and it's a richer story. It's like, why not speak two or three languages? Why not? It makes the story richer, and we're part of it. And there's nothing you can change it so that we don't exist. But then anything that's false like that, it won't hold together. You know,
Exactly.
it won't hold together.
Well, I'm going to welcome in Lynn to our conversation. Lynn is one of our regular book club participants. I've really learned a lot from Lynn as well. She's always been contributory to our discussion. So Lynn, go ahead and make your comment.
Well, I just thank you for being here, Joy. And I just appreciated how you made the connection between the historical Trail of Tears and what's going on today with Indigenous people with battles against alcoholism and substance abuse. And we can certainly add to that battles against COVID. So that was very insightful for me. So thank you very much. And one brief comment, we had a lady who started as a volunteer and then was an employee at the Cultural Center for more than 20 years. And she's a dear friend of mine, Joy Muskogee, and she lives near Tulsa. So you share a beautiful name. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, she's great. Isn't she there in New Mexico?
No, she moved about 3 years ago and lives near one of her sons.
Okay, I'll have to look her up.
All right, we have another comment or question from, it just says S. If S can identify themselves, we'll have you ask this person. But she makes a comment, says, on page 26, you write about the indigenous Bolivian woman. And so is that Sylvia? Is that your question, Sylvia? Are you unmuted, Sylvia? Are you there?
We can't hear you.
Okay. Well, let me read here. It says, Ms. Harjo, on page 26 of your book, you write about the indigenous. Oh, there she is. Go ahead, Sylvia.
I apologize. So on page 26 of your book, you write about an indigenous Bolivian woman who asked you, why do you call yourselves America when
Sylvia, we're getting a little bit of feedback. So let me ask you a question, okay? For some reason, we're getting a little bit of feedback. You're getting real distorted. But Sylvia or Joy, Sylvia asks, you write about the indigenous Bolivian woman who asked you, why do you call yourselves American? As a Puerto Rican woman, I know what she means about U.S. citizens calling themselves Americanos. And when this whole hemisphere is called America, what do you say to her?
Well, I agree with her. I mean, it sounds like if you look at it, the hemisphere is a one body, and it's a body, it's a person.
Thank you. I'm back. I'm sorry.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, there you now.
And I really do appreciate your being here today, Ms. Harjo. I appreciate very much your work. And just yesterday, I went to look at the map with all the poets. It's a wonderful kind of work to situate people in places and then tell stories of the past, the present, and the future. So I appreciate that. And yes, so I've always, coming from Puerto Rico, had the feeling that we really have appropriated the word Americans, but it really belongs to all of the hemisphere. If that is the word, the name we have given to this whole half of the globe, of these two continents, then we should share the name, or maybe just say United States people. I don't know what we would call ourselves, but I can understand what the indigenous woman in Bolivia was speaking about.
Yes, and it stayed with me because it made so much sense. I remember her being surprised that we were all there from way north, because she said, and I don't think she was joking, we thought John Wayne killed all of you, but there was something in that, because in a way, John Wayne did kill us as human beings. Yes. I was watching a part of some old Western that Shirley Temple, I don't know how I wound up there, because I had work to do, and it was horrible.
Yes.
It was, and you could see where all this stuff has its roots, and it goes way back where we're not full human beings, and to even, there were, attempts even in a sweet little storytelling to demean us.
Yes, that's right.
And Sylvia, just to add to what Joy said, we all, as indigenous groups of people who have an ownership of the languages we speak, we already have a name for who we are and the places in which we live. They don't always coincide or always mean the same as others, because like for my father, who comes from a different group of Pueblos than for my mother, they already have a name for each of themselves, just like our neighbors, the Dene or Lakotas or Menominees or Ojibwe or other groups of people, they already have a name. But the name America actually is named after an Italian who was one of the first cartographers, map makers, who came in Columbus's fourth voyage, that as he began to map out the coasts of South America, he wanted to give it a name. And oftentimes names were given in terms as it applies to land with a feminine gender. This land was given a feminine gesture, but since he was an Italian, his name would have ended in O. His last name was Americo Vespucci, but to then give it a feminine name, he changed the last letter of Americo to America. And that's why we have the Western hemispheres as identified as America now. But really, it just stems from the fact of a mentality of imperialism and colonialism, that someone has the right to say to you, I'm going to call you this because I feel I have that right. And so that's the whole, pretty much the story of why the Americas are called the Americas.
Yes, that is correct, and I agree with you. I appreciate you clarifying that, though, for everybody. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. And thank you very much for joining us today, Sylvia. We're going to go next to Stacy. So Stacy, get ready. We're going to unmute you, but I think you have a question for Joy. So welcome. Thank you for joining us, Stacy.
Hello, Joy. It's such a privilege to get to ask you this question. I've noticed in your teaching, you love Mama Day, and you have taught The Housemaid of Dawn as a memoir. So I'm wondering if Mama Day informed how you have written your memoir, or what parts of Mama Day's looking toward land and place you have used in your memoir.
Well, I've taught The Way to Rainy Mountain as a memoir. And that's the one, because it is somewhat, I mean, it's a mix of things, but I think that book influenced so many people. It influenced the Laguna poet and novelist Leslie Silko for her book Storyteller. And it certainly had an effect on the way I've organized some of my books. Most people have no idea, and I won't go all of that into that here, but I've always from my book, The Woman Who Fell from the Sky, I wanted to show the book as an oral event. Even if it's written, it's still an oral event. That's the roots of our storytelling, whether it's novel or actual storytelling. And then poetry, the roots go back to music and oratory. So I do that in my books by putting in little stories, and it shifts with each book I've done. Conflict resolution. So this one does it a little bit, but it's not so obvious. But I do have little pieces, like how something would happen if you were at an event and you would tell history, might tell, sing something and tell a story. And conflict resolution, I even have little pieces that to me are like song riffs, if you were playing saxophone or something. But so, yeah, he's definitely, had an effect. And I hadn't even thought about it with my new memoir, Poet Warrior, A Call for Love and Justice. My editor named it that, and it made sense. There's a voice that goes all through it. It's a voice with poetry, but it's a younger woman voice and her coming of age. So in that voice, you see a coming of age. But overall, the book is someone my age looking, as I move towards that last doorway here on Earth, or last Earth doorway, because there are many beyond that aren't necessarily Earth. And I'm looking, and I have grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and we'll have great someday. And I'm looking through and thinking of all the teachers I've had, and Mama Day's one of them. And there are many teachers, and some of them I've never met in person. I've heard of them or met them in books, and then others are like the Pacific Ocean in Hawaii is one of my main teachers. So it's about looking and list, what I've learned from especially those parts of my life that I failed. And then looking at kindness and those moments of kindness with people. One of my favorite stories involves my daughter and her oldest daughter's father, which could be seen as tragic, but I think of it as the story of how love prevails no matter what happens.
It's so interesting that you mentioned about how even the ocean is an educator, in that helping or learning is really twofold. It requires two components. May not necessarily be a person, but two components. So you have the instructor and then you have the learner. And then at some point, then it transitions that they exchange this type of responsibility. And in doing so, it's reminded me, especially working at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, because that whole facility at one point was a boarding school that was started by, in the 1879, initially in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And certainly that's a very traumatic historical component of our ancestors. But in a sense, we have to be thankful for them because they endured that trauma, so that now we have indigenous peoples that are educators and academics and researchers and healthcare practitioners, attorneys. We even have a native person who flew up in the International Space Station. So by their surviving that trauma, we get to be here. Now we're using the tools that were forced upon them, the medium of English and technology, to tell our story. We take ownership of that.
Mhm. And it's good that we have a language. I consider it a trade language so that we can all, these natives and all people from all across can speak with each other. Even
That's
as
it. Go ahead.
even as we have our indigenous languages to hold that which needs to be kept together within us.
That's a very unique way to say a trade language, because really it is just interaction of people. Before we go to the next comment, Alan made a comment. He says the history we were taught in school was revisionist. And we
Mhm.
just mentioned and talked about that. So thank you very much for that comment, Alan. And also thank you, Stacy, for making that comment. So I'm going to go to another one of the talking points that sort of focuses on what we were just talking about in just a bit ago, was this ownership of our narrative. We act as guardians, and it's our responsibility, in whether it's going to be in poetry or music or art, that as long as we will continue to tell the story of who we are as indigenous people, that's really our, in a sense, our burden. We take ownership of it. We certainly are stewards of that construct, and we protect it. We're guardians of it, but it's our responsibility not to alter it. Otherwise, we do a disservice to those who have preceded us. So if you make some comments on that, Joy.
On the ownership.
Yeah.
I have to ask me something particular.
Okay. Well, obviously, when you were talking about, the story of your mother, obviously it's a very personal theme of your, because that's what really, again, I connected with that particular poem. That's telling that intimate, emotional partnership that you shared with your mother who passed away, that I can certainly understand too. And some of us who are our guests have had family members, a parent who has passed on, to really say that I'm going to tell my story, but I'm going to tell it the way I want because I take ownership of that.
Mhm. I know, and there can be a lot of different versions, and it makes me wonder. I mean, it just brings up a question about a core story, and yet it's the diversity of the tellings that give it a kind of richness. I mean, I tell this story. I didn't plan to write that poem at all. I was in another whole mode with another side of my family, I
Yeah.
was writing about that history. And then I'm sitting there and this poem just comes. I mean, I revise a lot. They don't just come out and there they are. I revise a lot. And that poem just I just had to follow it. I took out a lot of stanzas. He went on. There was even more.
Oh, there was. Wow.
Yeah, there was even more stories and so on. And it's long now. It's the longest poem, I think, in the collection. But I was thinking about how that poem came about because, maybe it had, in some way, you could say ownership, because I didn't have control over the situation. I wanted to stay there and take care. I wanted to take care. I wanted my mother's body to be with us.
Mm-hmm.
Take care of her spirit by taking care of her body in a certain way. And yet other family members are more westernized, and immediately they called, the funeral home, and there were these strangers that came. Two strange men came to pick up the body of our mother, and there's so much in that body. I mean, there's DNA. It's the story. The body is a body is stories, which the poem showed. The poem revealed to me, because I wasn't thinking that. I follow poems to see where it's going to go, and they become teachers of sorts. My poems become teachers to me and maybe to other people. So I followed it. And that's why I didn't know what I was getting into, but I knew it was like suddenly my spirit was saying, okay, you didn't get a chance to take care of your mother the way you wanted to, but now here is your chance. Yes, we've crossed time, and it's been some time, but here is your chance. So I did it in a poem. I went back and I took care of her. So I took ownership in a sense of a way of taking care of her. My sister's poem would be very different,
Yeah, certainly, especially when you have siblings, because when I think about my mother's passing, some of my siblings, now I have 7 siblings, and because they're involved with a different component of the spirituality, they don't see it in that regard. So normally in our culture, the men don't really do any component with a dead body, but it's just, I guess it was just, as you said, your spirit told you one thing, and it sort of kind of went over the boundaries of accepted norms at that time. So normally I was there with my mom because it was something more important than just a tradition or a culture.
Mhm.
And again, that's the part of responsibility that we, I guess, accept at certain points in time.
Yeah, and another question that comes up about ownership that's come up a lot is who owns the stories, who owns the right to tell a story. And I remember years ago being in Canada at a big festival. I think it was in Montreal, a big book festival. It was huge, all kinds of people there. And I was with mostly Canadian Native poets and writers. And I remember we all went to a session where this non-Native woman had been writing stories given to her by an older Native woman, and she had begun not crediting them and had started kind of taking on, kind of pretending she was Native, not saying it outright, but not saying that they weren't hers.
Not full disclosure.
No, she was writing on this thing. And so one of the women who knew that woman, and had the authority to question her, did publicly. And she
Mhm.
said that she would stop. And I haven't seen her. She did stop doing that because she was co-opting. They were not her. They did not, the woman was sharing them with her, but they did not, essentially, I mean, who did they belong to? I guess you can gift a story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's oftentimes one of the, I guess you say, the observations of anthropologists and authors who have come to our Pueblo communities. One of them was a man that came to the Pueblo Zuni in the 1800s. He wrote a book, but he never really, he certainly told the stories of the Pueblo, of the Zuni people, but really never gave them the credit, the fact that this is their story. And so oftentimes that's one of the more common understanding, that certainly there are stories, but we have every right to tell our stories.
Right.
We're going to go to, we have Bryson online. He has a comment or question. So if you, we're going to meet you there, Brian, and I think you have a comment or something to point out to Joy. So thank you for joining us today, Bryson. Okay, are you there? Can we unmute Bryson? Are you there, Bryson? Well,
John,
while we're getting,
unable.
oh,
I'm
okay.
unable to unmute him. Go ahead and read his question.
Okay, so all right, Bryson wrote, some of us have been discussing restorative justice. And so he asks, what is your understanding of restorative justice?
Well, that's restorative justice is to allow the story its integrity. You know,
Mhm.
wherever that story is, whether it's in laws or in land care. I was going to say ownership, but nobody really owns it. You know, it's allowing the stories their integrity.
The one that word I've used as we're helping our guests understand that our Pueblo communities had been established as permanent agrarian societies for at least 500 years before the Spanish even came to this area, was that they didn't see it as ownership. They sort of knew the boundaries of their communities, and they said, well, I live here and you live over there, and so we don't need to mess with one another to a degree. But they saw it more, I guess the English word would be best, is stewardship. They took care of it. They cared for it. They didn't own it per se like a commodity, but they simply had a perspective of saying, this is what I need to care for the land. And so that's the perspective that I present to our guests when they come to the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center.
Yeah, there are keepers, and there are actual keepers. Some of them present and some of them spiritually, but there are actual keepers of all these plants and of all these lands. And a lot of peoples were assigned, indigenous peoples were assigned certain areas, just like indigenous peoples of other countries and other places.
Mm-hmm.
I remember talking with Gary Farmer once, and he said when they move those people, that's when you see tornadoes and you see all of these kinds of elemental tragedies, is when they move or move those keepers.
Uh-huh. Well, we're going to bring on another of our guests here, Douglas. We're going to unmute you here, and Douglas has a comment or question, and he's referring to on your book, Joy, on page 47. So go ahead, Douglas. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Hello, Joy. My name is Douglas, and I'm happy to hear that you attended the University of New Mexico, since I taught there for 25 years. On page 74 of your book, you wrote a poem for those who would govern, which very much struck me. I was wondering what motivated that particular poem. And of course, I couldn't help but think that our current president couldn't answer your questions yes to any of them, and wondering what thoughts you had. And I'm also interested in knowing whether our next president, whether it's important that he appoint a Native American as the head of the Department of Interior, as he is thinking about doing right now.
Well, that would be cool if he did. Yeah, I wrote that poem because, you know, as any of us, you watch people politicking and then getting into positions who are not suited for the job. They know, and I see that happen in tribal government. I see it happening in, you know, local government, city government, state, national, who have no qualifications or who in it for the wrong reasons. And that poem came out of thinking is, can you first govern yourself? You know, what's the state of your household? And really, you know, why people should know the history and laws of and then have compassion. You know, what's your intent of this kind of position? I mean, those seem like very basic questions, and we sometimes we ask those, but so often, and then we should not allow people into those positions if they are unqualified. If the only thing that qualifies them is they have the funds. They have the funds to and the hired story makers to craft an exciting narrative that may have no basis mostly in truth at all.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Douglas. We appreciate you joining us today. Before we continue on, I'm going to just again reintroduce our very special guest here, also to pass along some more information. If you have received our book club information, I'm glad you have, and I appreciate all the feedback we're getting. We also, if you do not have not received our book club information, like the remainder of the year, the books that we will be reading, as well as I've already outlined the books that we will be reading for the year 2021. If you want that information, go to the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center books a website. It's just indianpueblo.org. There's an opportunity there to ask any questions, or perhaps if there's questions for Joy you'd like to ask, and maybe we can refer those to her as well. But if you'd like a copy of the upcoming books for next year, you're welcome to do that. And so again, I want to reintroduce our very special guest today. She's joining us from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Joy Harjo, who's a celebrated and recognized voice and contributing to the narrative of indigenous peoples. And she has also been a author, a poet, a musician, which I love the music. I still have that old CD I ever have of You Got way back a long time ago when I first got introduced to you, Joy. An educator, and now serving a multiple term as U.S. Poet Laureate Joy Harjo. So again, thank you very much. I really do appreciate you joining us today, Joy.
Well, I'm really glad I could. I have a lot of great associations with the cultural center from the beginning, and I've been part of events there, played concerts there with the old Poetic Justice band and so on. My kids are, they go there, they're part of it, and grandkids, and so it's an important place to us.
So we're going to unmute Dwayne. So Dwayne, if you get ready to ask your comment or question for Joy, we appreciate you joining us here for our book club. And remember, we'll a little bit later on, I'm going to be passing you some more information about our December book club. So stay tuned. And like I said, if you want some more information about the book club for the remainder of the year, as well as for next year, you're welcome to do that. So thank you again for joining us today, Wayne. Go ahead with your comment or question for Joy.
Good afternoon. First, I want to say thank you for being with us and for allowing me to be part of this and to participate. My question is about the Favorite Poem Project. And I don't know how familiar you are with that and the work of the Favorite Poem Project and the Summer Institute that they host for teachers, which no longer exist. Do you foresee something similar happening in the future again with the work of the Poet Laureate?
Yeah, that program was started by Robert Pinsky, the only other poet to get 3 terms. And excuse me, sorry about
Bless you.
that. The only other poet to get 3 terms. And I'm not real familiar. I'm familiar with the Favorite Poem Project, but I didn't know about all the other part of it. It sounds like it was a great program, and I know that it was very successful. And I think it's still up, it's still up on the site. So as far as I'm not connected with that one in particular. And so, I'll be working on, my initiative is to bring indigenous poets more into the public in a way that they never have, would never have been. But one thing I wanted to say about that map is that we were, because of capacity, there's 2 people, working on it. And then we could not put up, there are many Native poets, many, hundreds of them. So 47 is just a very small piece, but I would love it to have a map with all the poets on it. And then show all the ancestors of the poets, because we have poetry ancestors. I would love to see that, but this map is just a beginning. And I think the story map software is available to people to kind of do their own poetry maps or story maps of anything, like a map of Pueblo poets or New Mexico poets or Southwestern. It's important, to show that, a map of the artist. It's really cool. I like seeing things I love mapping, the idea of mapping. Of course, my ultimate goal is a map of the soul.
Yeah. Something a philosopher or a theologian would probably love to do as well.
Yes.
We're going to go next to Deborah. So Deborah, we're going to unmute you. We have, she has a question for Joy. And so I want to thank you again, Deborah. Deborah is one of our consistent book club attendees. So it's really good to speak with you again, Deborah. So go ahead, ask your question for Joy. Are you there, Deborah? I think I see you unmuted on my side. Okay, well, let me, well, maybe she's getting squared away. Deborah writes here, I have a language question. Do you also write poetry in the Muskogee language? On page 86 or 96, Beyond was in English and a native version. Which do you write first?
I started writing the one in Muskogee language, Flintopethla, which means beyond. And then I got my Muskogee language isn't as I had to call in help. I was getting lost. There are several of us that are thinking about translating and even translating native poetry classics into Muskogee language and so on. And I love those videos that have come out of young people singing like classic rock songs with their own tribal language. That really sparks an interest in young people. I would love to do a workshop like that where young people take some of their favorite songs and then translate them into their tribal language and sing them. Because it reinvigorates the language and it also gives them, you know, I think that's a great project. So it's I want to acknowledge the language and give it a place. So it's in my new album. I sing in my language in several places in the album.
One of the things we're going to be asking, get some more of our attendees to ask some questions of you, Joy, but I wanted to ask you a question. I was looking over at your website and I have your website address on the screen here. I'll put that up in a little bit. One of the things which is very helpful because we're talking about language, and that's always a constant threat and a concern for many of our indigenous peoples, as we know that many of our older citizens are passing on and they're taking with them language unless we make an effort to ensure that the language remains here. You have a component on your website that has poetry working with children. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I think we were putting up resources. We were putting up, Jennifer Elise Forrester, my assistant, is responsible for that. She's been great as an assistant. And she's of the Perryman family, the Creek family, a very well-known family around here, just south of Tulsa, the Perryman family. And she helped me. I called her in and she helped me. We started a mentorship program it started out, it was called For Girls Becoming, a mentorship program in the arts for young Muskogee Creek women of like 15 to 20, the early 20s, to connect them with a Muskogee Creek artist as an apprentice to a Muskogee Creek artist. So our pilot program, we had a basket maker, Creek basket maker with a young woman, songwriter, is a pretty well-known Muskogee Creek singer, songwriter, Grant Lee Phillips in Nashville, mentored a young woman. We had a painter, Dana Tiger, and so on. And that program went really well. We invited a lot of the community members to our meetings, and when we always had food, and the young women, at the end of it, we had a big community feed, and the young women presented what they had learned. Even a young woman who'd been playing flute and wanted to learn saxophone. So, yeah, there were all kinds of, so that program was so successful that Nancy Mason, who heads up the tribal division of Muskogee youth, took the project over and has added young men, and it's become, we want to grow that. So we're involved in that. So, you know, we want to do a lot, certainly to promote the arts period among our Muskogee Creek people, but young natives in particular, because they're so gifted and talented and need a place to learn and to, you know, to practice, you know, the arts, because they're often left behind. Everybody jumps behind athletics, which is fine. We need movement and we need skill there, or academics, but usually the arts were left behind. And what helped me coming up in Tulsa, we had arts way back. We had music, we had art, and that's where I excelled. And if I hadn't had that, I mean, I did fine everything else except for gym. But if I hadn't, yeah, it would have made a huge difference. And so much of that has been cut out in our, Native kids, and all kids need that for a rounded out existence, I think.
Mhm. Then let's try one more time to go back to you. Deborah, are you there, Deborah? Again, she's one of our regulars that participates with our book club. Maybe she might be having something issues with her computer. We're going to go to Lisa. She has a comment or question. So if you can unmute Delisa, we have you want to make a comment or question for Joy. Thank you for joining us today, Delisa.
Hi, Yat Joy Harjo. She'e Delisa Begainchia. So good afternoon. Hello, and thank you for just allowing me this short time to ask a few questions. And thank you for hosting this book club meeting. And just thank you, Ms. Harjo, for just sharing your time. So thank you very much. But I wanted to share, or I was just kind of curious, I know like as poets and writers that, there's always this emphasis of language, even in Native cultures like storytelling, singing, and all of that holds like a sacredness to it and importance in how we share and talk. And I'm just kind of curious as the poet laureate, and I'm not sure how you feel, answering this, just being poet laureate when it feels like we were living, or I felt like I was living through a time of doublespeak or abuse of language, that seemed it really hurt people or the country as well. So I'm just kind of curious as the poet laureate, just how, if you're willing to share like how that felt too, because I think one of at least the redeeming things of this time was knowing that we have you as a poet laureate there. And I just would sometimes wonder, like, how does that feel, And so if you're comfortable sharing, I would really appreciate that. But I just feel like language was sometimes under attack during this time. But I guess it's always been that way too. So thank you. Thank you for taking my question.
Well, I thank you for that. And I agree with you that language was, we use language to carry meaning. And it was and is painful to hear, language born out of an intent, because you can hear intent behind words. You can read intent behind words, that the intent of language was generally not to enrich or to connect us or to make for a better life. Rather, it was meant to demean. It was being used as a tool or as a weapon to demean and to destroy and to hurt people. And we could all, it doesn't matter, and I'm not talking about even necessarily political division in terms of Democrat, Republican. It's not even, there's being a human being. And I think that it doesn't matter. You can hear when somebody means the people well. That goes back to what the man who had taught at the University of New Mexico for years, that poem about governing. It goes back to that. What are we in this position for? And what are we doing in this position? So it's very painful to come in. It's like having it's very painful to have leadership working to undermine connection, a connection and a sense of connection that has been at the root of, I think, of this country having You know, the origins of this, the idea of this of the governance of this country came out of indigenous ways of thinking, you know, of balance, of having balance. And that also means balance of men and women, you know, in leadership positions in certain ways. And so it's been difficult. And to be poet laureate during this time, that's why I'm kind of, I agreed to take on a third term, because they said, well, I did not get, because of COVID, I have not had the ability to really do what I was supposed to, you know, to do, because, you know, we've all been very restricted. But I'm relieved that we appear to be moving into a time where most of us, and I believe it's most of us, want, you know, we want our leadership to express kindness. They may not always have the same, they may not always do things the way we, you know, they may go against some things we want in particular or need, but at least there is a system in place, and a system of guardianship that is in place. And we saw that undermined. But it's been very difficult too. I figure that my position, I'm holding it, you know, I'm just kind of trying to hold an integrity. And it's not just me, it's every, you know, all you guys, everyone that I'm part of, to hold an integrity and say, you know, this is, you know, when poetry, if you speak poetry and if you give yourself over to a craft of language, there's also the rule of, you know, it's about integrity. You know, it's about integrity, and it's about compassion, and it's not about yourself. It can't be about yourself. You know, anytime you're given any kind of power, you know, whether it's being in a position like this, being a president, being a principal chief or a tribal chairman, or it doesn't belong to you. The power is given to you to share. It's not yours. And we've been watching it just go, being conflated and used as a whip and destruction. So, and I can't say too much as a poet laureate. I'm a, you know, a special government employee.
There's always those ethics that are involved, and that's, I guess, perhaps also what's missing is understanding that we do have a sounding board at times, but we oftentimes will be held responsible for the words we use. So that's ethics.
Yeah, and it's also too about, I think it's important is that you, as I was told, we'll put it in a poem if you want to say something. I think I have been. That's what I've been doing. The poetry, the discipline, because it is a discipline of poetry, is to be careful. You learn to be careful and be studied with your words, because they do have power, and they can, as we've seen. It's been a very good lesson for all of us. I think we have to look at the positive part of it, that how easily we can be railroaded and sidelined, and destruction can happen. It can happen easily unless we stay coherent, you know, within ourselves and within our families and within our communities.
And, you know, that's perhaps a lesson I've learned being associated with the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. Certainly, I have had the great opportunity to speak about our Pueblo communities, but I'm beholden to them. I'm speaking not because of them. I mean, not for them, but because of them, that I get to tell our Pueblo narrative. And it's with great respect and humility that I get to do that. And so that's what, as Indigenous people, that we have that opportunity. We're going to wait a little bit more for some more comments and questions if there's any more that are coming there. But what I want to do next, Joy, is I was really, I guess you say, impressed with, in the back of the book, you have a reading guide or a discussion guide that is kind of brings out some points. And so I'm going to bring another one up that also I was very intrigued by as it applies to this particular book. And let me bring it up here. And it's let's see here.
Yeah, they didn't ask me about that. I didn't even know about that. And
Oh,
so,
okay. Well, this is one of the poems.
Yeah,
One of the poems. It says, "Human poetry is a restless soul," and it's that constant. It's also kind of connected with that journey that we all share. Certainly, the journey that we choose as whatever choices we make in life, and then sometimes those journeys that are forced upon us, like your people, the Navajo people. We're fortunate as a Pueblos that we still inhabit the lands that our predecessors developed for us, simply because the Spanish, in their the colonial mentality, sought to Christianize the people first. And with that, just that statement alone, it implies that they saw them to a degree as human beings, because you only Christianize human beings, those individuals that you accept as having souls that are worth saving. And so with that, perhaps that mentality, that was perhaps a perk, I guess you'd say, that they then worked to Christianize them. Whereas with other indigenous groups throughout North America, and even actually we could say for the Western Hemisphere, some people never were given that opportunity to be seen as humans. And so that human poetry is a restless soul. How does that relate to what you were trying to express in that particular poem?
Yeah, let me see. I'm trying to remember which poem it's in.
Okay, let me bring up it's in the back of the book. It's talking about the let's see, on page 35. Human poetry is a restless soul. It does not always know what it holds.
Right. Rising and
Rising and falling.
Yeah, I just think sometimes I think we all get, time gives us context, or going beyond time. And what I've learned, I mean, certainly age gives a kind of perspective of time. I see things differently with each generation. I feel like I was a teenage mother, and that was very difficult in a lot of ways, but it also gave me a perspective, because then I had children young, and then I had grandchildren young, and great grandchildren young. You know, I'm going to turn my video off and stand up, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
I need to do that. I'm sorry, but I need to stand up right now. Oh, sorry. I'll just continue talking like this. So
Sure.
if you don't mind.
No,
So,
no worries.
anyway, so yeah, so there's something about that the context gives you time. And so then if you can, you know, I think that's one reason we so look up to like the eagle and other such birds, because they have a certain kind of perspective in time that gives you a different kind of context when you can get above the earth. And let me see, I should write this down. I'm trying to think of how to. So with each, with perspective, then you start getting, it goes back to wanting to make a map of the soul, you know.
Mm-hmm.
With perspective, you get more of the over story. And so sometimes I think about how there are things that happen, there are things that have happened to our people that make no sense to us at all and never will. Acts of violence and mutilation. There are things that have happened, you know, to country, you know, in war, and to women, to everybody, that ultimately make no sense at all. Why does such and such happen to people? Why are these children, you know, they're the stories are you know, the stories of being human, the stories of history can be brutal, even as some of them can be beautiful. And so I always think about how a perspective, that there's a perspective out there that I get glimpses of, and sometimes it's poetry that gives me, or a piece of art or music that gives me that momentary perspective on you know, to know that there is a larger sense that we may never, you know, we get moments of it, like that sunrise, like watching that smoke, the cooking fire at sunrise. There is a doorway in that moment in which there's a place in which everything will make sense. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. It gives us, well, at least, like I said, I connected with that particular poem because it's when we look at the journeys of all groups of people. I mean, we could even say when we think about the peoples that inhabit now the Southwest, they journeyed from somewhere at some point. We have our immersion stories, stories that say that we came either from the ground or we came from the North or the South. All of these stories are really ways that sort of help us understand life is a journey, that being a human is really a journey. As we go through life, we have somewheres we stop and stay for a while, then we'll rest, and then we'll get more knowledge or more skill sets. Then we'll say, okay, well, where's my next opportunity? Where's my next adventure? So again, that's what I saw in that particular poem, that when it says that human poetry is a restless soul. Some certainly will take advantage of that urge to travel, and some will say, no, this is where we're going to be, and we'll stay here and continue to develop our lives for our future generations. And then there are those who are forced upon them, like your peoples and the other peoples that have had to suffer those horrible long journeys, but they survived, they continued. And that's what the narrative that we want to help our those who participate in the book club understand, that these are the journeys that we talk about.
Yeah, there's something that one time I went to Machu Picchu, and I was down in Cusco, and we went on a little tour through but with an archaeologist through a museum they had in Cusco. And I came upon a stone lion there. It was very, very, very old. And I just told everybody to go ahead. I stayed there. I had tears. There was something in it. And you know what I felt there? I felt like these long lines of trails that hooked up to Pueblo people, that it made a connection with Muskogee Creek people, because we have some Southern origins too. It was very strange. I've never experienced anything quite like that, where I saw almost like that stone lion there was kind of from a navel cord place from way, 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 way back that connected us. It was really interesting. It was like one of those moments where there was a little doorway, and there was a connection that I saw, that it was really old. So I have researched and tried to find. We're gonna go back at some point. My husband wants to go down there, and but I've tried to find out more about that stone lion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can share with you, and I have been fortunate enough to also go to Machu Picchu and look at and walk on the grounds of those groups of people that created that civilization. And certainly they had a different construct of spirituality because of the knowledge that they provided from the stories that they told. But when you really take the time to walk amongst those buildings that they created, it just says so much about them. If someone took the time not just to see these buildings, but really to understand that you're walking in a place where human beings walked. You're walking in a place where mothers and fathers and children every day live their lives. And it's a beautiful, exotic place to walk amongst the ruins at Machu Picchu. But if you just took the time to be quiet, gather in that experience, it says so much. And it would be wonderful if other people could experience that as well.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Deborah's still having some issues, but we're going to ask another one of her questions. Then in just a bit, we're going to go to Linda, one of our other regular participants. But Deborah asks, I really admire your ability to combine the intimate and personal with the universal and human in your work. Do you find it hard to maintain this balance now that you are a poet laureate? And do you think you are a different kind of poet than now than when you have a more public voice?
That's a good question. Most of my poetry poetry happens in a very intimate kind of space. And then what happens when you have a lot of eyes on you, it still happens in that same kind of space. But I guess COVID has changed the experience a little, because I do feel, you know, COVID has changed it, because I'm still, you know, a lot of artists and people who create this time it's given us a lot of time. But I don't know. I mean, I've always just, for me, writing poetry, there's always something larger than myself that that I feel like I'm carrying. I might try to go back on. I've set myself up standing here, but I might do a little adjusting. Let's see what I can do.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, I can't see it here because you have that up, but
Okay, no, it looks great. Looks great, Joy.
turn
Go
that
ahead,
light off.
go
Can
ahead,
you see me?
continue. Yes, I
Yeah.
can see you.
Okay, so yeah, let me ask that question again. I feel like I'm not hitting it.
Sure, let me bring it up here. It was from Deborah. And let's see, she asked, she appreciates the personal style in which you write, and that as poet laureate now, how does it being in a public space different than what you were before, it being not so noted and being so connected to a more broader public?
Well, it has changed. I mean, for years, I've been writing poetry, and I've been going about sharing poetry for years. Since I was a student at University of New Mexico, I started doing that. And so it's something I've done for years. This certainly added a huge, I mean, it certainly shifted the gears quite a bit. So, but most of my terms, I've been mostly inside. And so if I don't go on social media and stay away from that, I'm still a poet. And my poetry has always been very different and unique. It's not like, you know, it's always been itself. I don't write like necessarily like other people. I mean, I write in English, but it's my sensibility. It's just what it is. And so has it changed what I write? I've written one poem I've written a memoir, I've done and written and recording a music album, but I've written one poem that I've turned into a song. I could play it for you.
Oh, sure, that would be wonderful, Joy.
I have to pull it up though.
Okay.
You have to know that this is the one poem I've written since I've become, but otherwise I've written a lot of things. I don't see it. See, rough mixes. I think he took that rough mix out. Let me see if I can find it. Otherwise, I won't be able to do it. My producer has been very, let's see.
Well, while you're looking for it, I wanted to tell you that I used to play saxophone too, and I was really enamored when I first came upon Native Roots, that someone had incorporated the saxophone, especially the soprano sax, into a more contemporary form of music, because most of the time, when I learned to play sax, you played, marching music and concert music, but then to see it in a modern, if not a rock form, other than, Jethro Tull, well, he played the flute, but to really see it in a way that it was a whole new genre. And so I admire the fact that you use the saxophone in Native Roots. I still have that CD from long ago.
Yeah, Poetic Justice, which became most of it.
I'm sorry, Poetic Justice. I apologize. Yeah, Poetic Justice.
Place. And at the end, I put in a little Muskogee song, which is a blessing song. And this is about the power to honor young women and to honor the beauty and the power in young women. The sun, the blessing of creation, led her into the human story. That was the first beauty. Next beauty was the sound of her mother's voice, rippling the waters beneath the drumming skin of her birthing cocoon. Next beauty, her father with kindness in his hands, as he held the newborn against his breathing. Next beauty, the moon through the dark window. It was a rocking horse, a wish. There were many beauties in this age, for everything was immensely itself. Green, greener than the impossibility of green. A taste of wind after its slide through dew grass and dawn, or language running through a tangle of wordlessness in her mouth. She ate well of the next beauty. Next beauty planted itself urgently beneath the warrior shrines. Next beauty beaded by her mother, pinned neatly to hold back her hair. Then how tendrils of fire of longing grew into her. Beautiful the flower between her legs as she became herself. Do not forget this beauty, she was told. The story took her far away from beauty. In the test of her living, beauty was often long from the reach of her mind and spirit. When she forgot beauty, all was brutal. But beauty always came to lift her up to stand again. When it was beautiful all around and within, she knew herself to be cornblack, moon, and sunrise. Death is beautiful, she sang, as she left the story behind her. Even her bones at times were tuned to beauty.
So you said the last part of piece there had some Muskogee language, and what was it saying there?
It's like, it was I kind of asking a blessing around the four directions at sunrise,
Mm-hmm.
like a sunrise time, a new beginning.
That's the best way to put sunrises. That again, go along with the book, that it's a blessing and a new beginning for every day.
Mhm. Yeah.
We're going to go to Linda. She's another one of our book club participants who comes regularly. So we want to thank all of those who have joined us. So go ahead, Linda. We're going to unmute you. And so go ahead and ask your comment or questions for Joy. And thanks for joining us again, Linda. It's good to hear your voice.
Great to be here. Joy, I have always considered that all down through time, from the very beginning, through all the centuries and eons, the one unifying force for good across all cultures and all peoples has been music. And that's something that we all seem to viscerally share and communicate with. And I don't think it matters what instrument or what form, although mine is jazz, maybe yours is too.
I love jazz. Yeah.
So do I. But I think it would be interesting to me. I'm sure you play the flute. Most saxophone players do.
Mhm.
But of the 4 saxophones, which one did you choose which best expresses your own feelings about your culture and your feelings about all the things that go on in the world around you that affect you?
Well, I started out, I was almost 40, and I picked up a tenor sax. And I bought a King Super, which is a very loud tenor sax.
No
And then I
kidding.
started teaching myself. And then later on, I got a soprano and started learning that one later on. And when I recorded my first album, I learned to play saxophone on it, was with Poetic Justice, my band Poetic Justice. And I played, what did I play on there? I played soprano, mostly soprano and alto. And by that time, I had gotten an alto, and there was a period early on when I would travel with 3. It was just crazy when we would perform. So I kind of went down to an alto. And then I decided to pull out when I was, we were recording these parts about 3 weeks ago. We did the foundation tracks in late July, and then Barrett came over to Tulsa, and I just pulled out my soprano on that one, and so I've got soprano on a couple of songs, and then I've got a real jazzy one. I don't know if I should pull it up and play the beginning. It's a kind of, I was influenced by one of Leslie Silko's poems with this rabbit story I wrote. And Rabbit invents the saxophone. I say, well,
Yeah.
figure, it'd be like Coyote invents the saxophone.
Yeah.
They're kind of trickster instruments. And so that one is real jazzy. And then I play on my album, Red Dreams, I learned to play, well, on Windings of the Milky Way, I started playing native flutes. And then I have on my, one of the songs, I have a silver flute part on it. So, but I mostly go to alto. I was thinking, I wish I could put everything on soprano for when I travel. It's easier to travel with, but I go generally to the alto. I don't have a tenor, and I thought about buying a Barry sax, but then I was teaching myself bass during the pandemic. I haven't practiced much lately, but for a while, that's what I was practicing a lot. But yeah, so I always say you can start learning later. A lot of people think you can't. And yeah, and then I should play this. I don't know if I can pull it up real quick. I won't play the whole thing.
Okay.
It's a trickster story, but I'll see if I can pull it up here.
Well, while you're doing that, let me just mention, I'm looking at our Facebook page for the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center book club, and we have about 15 people who have shown an interest. And so I want to thank all of those who have joined us through the social medium of Facebook. So we won't forget you. Go ahead, Joy. See if you got it.
Yeah, let me just see if this is the one, but I'll just play a little of the beginning, but it's my favorite one to play on. And this is with alto sax. Let me see what
Alto sax. Yeah, I played alto.
Uh-huh. When one of the last trails of tears wound through New Orleans, Rabbit, that ragged trickster, decided he wanted to be a musician. He was tired of walking, and they had all the fun. They got all the women. Fans gave him smokes, drinks, and he could have all kinds of new friends to do his bidding. But Rabbit hadn't proved to be musical. When he led at stomp dance, no one would follow. No shell shaker would shake shells for him. He was never invited to lead, even when the young ones were called up to practice. The first thing a musician needs is a band, he said to his friends. The hottest new music was being made at Congo Square. So many tribes are jamming there, African, Native, Cuban, and a few remnant French, making a new music of melody, love, and beauty. Rabbit climbed up to the stage, but had nothing to offer. Just his strut, charming banner, and what looked like a long stick down the tight leg of his pants. Musicians, our musicians, no trick will get by. You either have it or want it, nothing else will fly. Do you know any songs? What can you play? Can you sing? Do you have a piano, tuba, or strings? Musicians began vamping. What can this rabbit cat do? Is he gonna blow hot air or fart in the rain? Rabbit turned his back to the band like that genius Miles Davis. Pulled out his stick, he made a horn with his hands. The stick is so special, bragged Rabbit as he turned back to the jam. No one else has one like this. You've never heard it before. It's called a sax. Oh, phone. Rabbit's newborn horn made a rip in the sky. It made old women dance and girls fall to their knees. It makes singers of tricksters. It made tricksters of players. It made trouble wherever it sang after that. That's a problem in the mix. The last time we heard Rabbit was for my cousin's run for chief. There was a huge feast. Everyone showed up to eat. Rabbit's band got down after the speeches. We danced through the night, and nobody fought. Nor did anyone show up the next day to vote. They were sleeping. So
Wow, what a treat, Joy. That was great.
that's not mixed yet, as you could tell.
Yeah.
I did more than one take. And so you heard a couple of different parts at that one, but it's not mixed. So it's pretty raw. I just wanted to let everybody know that.
Well, it was great. I mean, Coltrane and Miles Davis there. Geez, it was pretty cool. It's a long way in evolution from She Had Horses, huh?
Yeah, it is. It's a little, yeah, that was who was it that was just asking the question about music, which I appreciated. So I kind of played that in response.
Well, thank you, Linda. I appreciate your asking the question. Before we go to the next part, I want to bring some comments from some people that aren't able to join us online. Deborah again, she says, last comment from me. I too am a former saxophone player, E flat, alto. My mother disapproved. She said it was not ladylike to play an sax. And then we have another comment from, it says, Lil Trove Frederick. She says, thank you very much, Joy. It's getting late here now in Sampai, Northern Saskatchewan, or Scandinavia. So thanks for joining us there. So we have a lot of people who have joined us online here to chat with you, Joy. As we get ready to kind of begin to end the latter part of our session here, Joy, you mentioned that you were working on a collaboration with some other artists and poets. And so if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there's let's see, a new collaboration. Well, I just came out as the anthology called When the Light of the World Was Subdued. Our songs came through, a Norton anthology of Native Nations poetry. This came out in August from Norton. And, you know, Norton's always had those essential anthologies for college students. And so this is the first time Norton has had an anthology of Native poetry like this that goes from time immemorial into the present. I think one of the youngest poets is the Dene poet, Jake Skeets. And so there's, and let's see, there's that, and the project, the Poet Laureate project. And I've lost my image here. I'm trying to find, I can't find my image, but I guess that's okay. You can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you, yes.
So I guess it's fine. You guys,
well, on the bottom of your screen, do you see, it might say a video on the lower left-hand corner?
it says, there it is. Thank you.
Okay, there you go. Sometimes we're learning new skill sets here. Everybody's learning how to be Zoomophites.
I've done so many Zooms. I was saying, this is my last one. Well, I have a panel with Smithsonian, and then I just got a message to do something else, but I'm trying to keep my schedule clean. I have been working so hard, since I was supposed to travel every week. And so I've been doing virtual, and you get a little bit of a burnout. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep December and most of January clear, just
Well,
to have.
I did put up on the screen your website, and so people can go to your website. On your website, you have a number of features and resources. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Joy?
Jennifer would be better because she's been keeping it. I don't know what all she's been putting up there, but we do put up lists of, I know there was one for children with poetry.
Right.
And she was putting up some other things. We try to put up resources for people based on the kinds of inquiries that come my way. I think what happens to, and I know this happens to other Native poets and writers, is that we go into events or to other parts of the country, and they expect us to be knowledgeable in law. I get that in law, in Indian law, federal Indian law, in everything, in a way that they wouldn't if you were just a poet going into, or a writer coming in and being interviewed. You're interviewed about, it's certainly humanity, but it's really different for natives. I remember one agent telling me one time, well, they've even asked me to come in to see if I would do basket weaving or something. But,
yeah, well, again, that's that, unfortunate perception that, okay, well, you're Native American, you should know how to do a rain dance, or you should, what's this symbol mean? Or I saw it on TV or a John Wayne movie, you should know, because they just think that, well, they're all the same. And
yeah.
so it's really just sad that people still have those kinds of perceptions.
Yeah, that they still do. I don't know if, I'm sure you're familiar with that group, Illuminative.
Yes.
Yes, they're doing wonderful things to help combat these kinds of misconceptions about us and who we are, that there's not just one Indian language. Like, can you speak Indian? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, exactly. That's, like I said, because the cultural center is out there, and certainly is being promoted by the state as a destination site for many guests who have come to New Mexico. Unfortunately, now we're in a lull because of the COVID issue, but we're still trying to make sure that students and educators, as well as guests, have the information available to them so that we can still accommodate our mission of being a narrative for our Pueblo people. And so what you're doing is doing the same thing, but on a different, medium.
Yeah.
As we get ready to close, what I wanted to do was ask you one last thing that I was kind of not confused about, but I had never heard it before. And it's this, be reading up my page here. It says a call response construction. And I think I saw it more as perhaps an educator would see you're providing information and a narrative, and then to an audience or to a reader, and then you're saying, now you take the talking stick and go. Is that what call response construction means?
No, it's sort of like, you hear it in music, and especially in in some of those Southern Christian traditions, but it comes out of, at our ceremonial grounds. I mean, at our music, our Muskogean music, you have a song leader, like we're going counterclockwise, and you have the song leader, and then the men respond. And then the song leader sings, and there's a back and forth. And then you'll hear it often in jazz. Even in blues is kind of, even the blues form is kind of a call and response form, or even, the singer will formulate the question or the statement a couple of times, and then there's a kind of response in the statement, in a blues form. So it's this kind of back and forth.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is it sort of like row, row, row your boat kind of thing, where there's everybody participates at certain levels?
Kind of, but maybe not quite that form.
Okay. But it's a call for for participation then.
Yeah.
Okay, and so the one that is exemplified in this in the back of the book, um, it says here on the number 8, way back in the back, it says Joy adapts a call response construction in her poem Advice for Countries, Advanced Development in Falling, Developing and Falling on page 79. And it asks, why do you think she chose this form, and how do you think it adds to what she's saying in the poem? So could you answer that for me?
This would have been a really good poem to respond to a question that was asked earlier about being a poet laureate during this time in the country. Was it Delissa that asked that?
Mm-hmm.
Delissa Begay. Yeah, who asked that? This would have been the perfect, response, because here it's the poem becomes a call and response of two different kinds of voices. A country is a person that sets up a country as a, and then the other voice saying a country is a noun to be bought and sold. I have a deed. And then the ruler's disposition and rules determine the state of being for all constituents. Each state governs itself, produces a response without respect for individuals. It's everyone for themselves. It's like two opposing kind of voices that are being wound together, in one poem.
Mm-hmm. Oh, can you read the rest of it, Joy?
Power is dangerous when wielded in the hands of one. It is meant to be shared. I was given this position by cunning, by money, by sex, by family, by God. It belongs to me and no one else. We cannot own anyone else, people, the lands or resources. We are here to care for each other. We are right. We build walls to keep anyone who is not like us out of here. God gave us these lands. We separate children and cage them because they are breaking our God's law. Every increment of thought, action, or deed matters, has consequences in all directions. Not if you can make a law, not if it passes the Supreme Court, not if we can pay for it. There will be no balance without all voices present in the power circle. You will never earn your way here. You are the wrong sex, wrong color of skin, wrong sexual orientation, not my religion, not my language. We are making our grandchildren's world with our words. We perceive a world in which everyone sits at the table together with enough for everyone. We will make this country great again. So that says, that,
Yeah, exactly.
that answers
And,
the question.
and I was wondering, when did you come up, or when did this poem get instilled in you?
Well, sometime during the last year,
Yeah.
last years, this book came out. In September was the pub date of this book, and it's been a few years, 2 or 3 years ago I wrote it. I must have written it.
And I know last year, 2019, a lot of the stories, especially the Washington Post, had a lot of stories as it applied to our African American citizens, fellow citizens of the first introduction of slaves into the colonies. And so for even today, a lot of the narrative news and talking points that commentators and pundits are pointing out of this divide in our country is focused predominantly on African Americans and the rest of our society. But and this is exemplified by that recent picture that was posted on CNN that talked about Africans or African American or Blacks and Chicanos or Hispanics, whites, and then something else. It shows the lack of understanding and who we are as a people. And so that's what I saw in this poem that you just read. And that's why I wanted to bring it up as a sort of drawing a conclusion to our discussion here.
Yes, my daughter, and I'd have to pull it up here, wrote a poem that will be featured tonight on an event for the Academy of American Poets called We Gather Here. And she wrote that poem. It went all over Indian country. It came after that CNN exit poll that said whites, and it gave numbers, Blacks, Latinos, something else, and then Asians.
Right.
And that was just so shocking. I mean, in this day and age, you would think, but you know, it was, so she wrote this poem. It's on her, what is the title of that poem? I'm trying to find it here, but
Okay.
more than Rainy Dawn Ortiz, more than something else.
Is it possible to read, or is it her
Yeah,
her ownership?
think
Okay.
she would mind. I'm not supposed to. She's got a deal where she's not supposed to print it anywhere else. And
Oh, okay. All right. Understand.
but I can read it.
Okay.
Yeah, she lives there in Albuquerque. She's Muskogee Creek and Acoma, and More Than Something Else by Rainy Dawn Ortiz. Something else, someone else, somewhere else. That place is here in my home. We are here. I am brown, brown hair, brown eyes, like cookies, Feather tells me, and I like to think it's perfectly cooked Pueblo cookies. My kids are something else, 9 different shades of brown, all beautiful. My grandkids are something else, 4 brown eyes, 2 blue eyes, all native. Definitely something else as I watch them be rowdy, be loving, be here in this world. We are here on this earth in this time and place, in our homes, on our lands, in the cities, with our families, laughing loudly, cooking together, protecting each other. We are something else with our songs, our dances. We pray with cornmeal, eagle feathers, medicine bundles, burn some sage. Make sure to acknowledge the 4 directions as the sun comes up. We are the something else who were here to greet Christopher Columbus. We were born from this earth, crawled out from the center of our mother's womb. We are important. We are strong. We are something else. We are Pueblo people, plains people, forest people, desert people, nomadic people, cliff dwellers, ocean fishers, lake and river fishers, hunters, medicine collectors, horse riders, artists, speakers, lawyers, doctors, teachers. We are human beings. We are something else. We are native people, indigenous to this land. We are a proud something else. By Rainy Dawn Ortiz.
Rainy Dawn Ortiz. Again, it just speaks to really, as we've been talking, that narrative that is not absent. It's still very relevant in our lives today. Joy, it's been such a treat and a pleasure to have you as our very special guest. And again, it's so good to talk with you again. As we get ready to close out, do you have any kind of closing words that you'd like to share with those who are participants in our book club?
Well, I'm glad people are reading. You know, it's an important way to gain knowledge and stories, and I'm glad you have this club. So thank you for inviting me, and it's good to be a part of a place that's always been really special to me and my family. And are you guys having that gingerbread house contest this year?
Actually, because of the COVID, we're not having any entrance or people submit their entrance for the gingerbread, but we will be having a gingerbread, actually a video presentation by our Pueblo chef, who will be demonstrating some cooking recipes for making gingerbread. So again, another invitation to go to our website at indianpueblo.org, scroll down and you'll see all the different events that are going on, but that includes the Pueblo, the Ginger House Pueblo gingerbread contest.
Okay.
Thanks for asking for that. So I'm going to put up on the screen in just a little bit your website, so we can get further access to all the information and resources that you have. The music that you said you're working on, will that be available at some point?
Yes, it will be available. The date it comes out is March 5th. It's Sunyata Records, and it's called I Pray for My Enemies, and that's the release date.
Okay, so we can look out for that as well. Well, again, Joy, thank you very much. It's such a pleasure. And again, I have so much really good memories of talking with you and learning from you, and also reading from the books. And I'm an avid reader, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Take
Okay,
care.
and then we want to thank everybody for joining us here. As we get ready to close out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of bring up some resources for those of us as we get ready to close out our session. First of all, on our screen, I'm going to show you what is going to be going on for our next month's book club. We will be meeting here again virtually because we want to be COVID safe with everybody. We want to make sure everybody's safe, that we can see each other again in the rest of the year. Let's see, am I reading that up? Let's see here. Okay, is that on the screen? I think so. Let's see here. Oops, What happened here? Did we get closed out? Alicia?
No, John, we're still on live, John.
Oh,
I
okay.
just can't see your screen.
Okay, I can't see my page here. Let's see here. What happened to my page? I think Joy closes out because it's not opening. Let me try again. Okay. Okay. So, do you see me on your screen, Alicia? Well,
I do, John.
Okay. You do see? Okay. Do you see me?
I do.
Because-
And I put in the chat, everybody, our next month's book club is going to be December 15th from 2 to 4 p.m. It's going to be My Life in San Juan Pueblo, stories by Esther Martinez.
Okay.
You can visit our website to join our webinar. I appreciate all of you being here.
Okay. Okay. So again, the webinar is closed out on my side. I can't see it. It's not opening up.
Okay, go ahead and do your closing, John.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for our Pueblo Book Club. So again, we want to thank all of those who contribute to making sure the book club functions every day. As you see on your screen, I have a number of great thanks for all the staff members here at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. Also, there's a book that we will be reading for our December book reading that will be also on December the 15th. And those are the contact information. Also, as I showed you before, we have Joyce Harjo's website on the screen as well. And so we ask that you would send any comments, questions, inquiries. If there was any concerns that you have or questions for Joy, there's the contact information for us on your screen as well. And again, thank you to all the people who make the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center Pueblo Book Club a reality. There's a lot of people that I rely on, and they've always contributed all of their assistance in making sure this happens every month. So looking forward to everybody. We ask everybody be safe, wear your face masks, wash your hands. Let's all take care of one another because we wear our face masks. We do all our social distancing for one another, not just for ourselves, because we are a community and that's what we work towards. So again, thank you for joining us at our book club. Look forward to having you join again. Be safe, take care of everyone, and we will see you again next month.